one thing that happens during flow is the vanishing of the ego, the self. You're still self-aware, you're still in your experience, you're still hearing things and perceiving, and you're having thoughts and everything, but you are not aware of your ego as the I in my existence. And so in team flow, you become one with the activity that the group is doing.
Ever wondered how to get your dev teams working together better? Have you struggled with just how disjointed your calendar ends up being day to day? How do you create an environment where ideas and work both happen smoothly and easily? Today, we're going to dig into the concept of flow with Kevin Scheepers, founder and host of FlowMade and GameWell. Kevin seeks to create high-functioning game studios with a focus on organizational flow. He believes we can, as an industry, do better than we are today at helping our people excel and produce the best games they can. Okay, so I want to dive in a little bit to flow, and I'll start by asking, how did you get interested in it?
Oh yeah. Oh God, I'm getting goosebumps already because I haven't actually said that in public yet. But I grew up as a huge nerd, right? I played a lot of games. I watched a lot of anime, and ultimately also ended up doing very traditional martial arts where they went around with the stick and actually hit you when you're not doing the things correctly. And so all of these different things have actually something very unique in common, and it's because the normal container of the world environment didn't give me access to something that I was desperately seeking, and that little something was flow. And the reason why I said it's something that I haven't really been public about is because the games that I played when I was younger honestly saved my life. It's a realization that I've had just recently that what I've learned from it, but also if you're growing up in an environment that is not optimal, and you just don't fit in, and there's nothing going for you, and you're stressed beyond it, and you're either bored beyond your mind or anxious beyond your mind. So one thing that you need in your life is something that allows you to forget yourself for a little bit, so you can come back and be integrated and kind of be resilient to struggle through the environment that you have, that period of your life. So it saved my life, and so that's what I became interested in.
Okay. What is flow?
Flow is an optimal state of consciousness. That means that it is a state where you're able to perform and feel your best without, burning out. It's maybe more important to making the distinction what flow isn't.
Okay.
Flow isn't something passive. So it's very important to make the distinction that it's an active state. It's an activity-based state of consciousness. And the reason why I'm saying that is because there's something that occurs that allows your personal experience, your personal awareness, to merge with the activity that you are engaging in. And so with games, very specifically, you merge with the game. You merge with the character. You become one. You become the character whilst you're playing it, if you're in.
Yeah, well, because today I want to talk about this related to game dev. I've heard about flow before, and I very much appreciate your succinct definition. That's really awesome. I haven't heard people talk a lot about flow and game dev.
Yep.
And specifically, you talked about the idea of setting up organizations for flow, and I've heard about that. But there's something I haven't wrapped my head around yet, which is the idea of organizational flow, because you just described sort of an individual flow. And I've often thought of that, perhaps incorrectly, or contextualized it as, oh, this is an individual state, and other people disrupt it and interrupt it and get in the way. And so what you want is you want to leave someone alone so they can get into flow and stay in flow, like when they're coding or
Yeah.
painting or whatever they're doing. But there's also a concept of organizational flow. And so, correct how I'm not thinking about this correctly.
Yeah, so you're right. There is something called individual flow state, and this is the one where you pretty much want to shut the door, shut off everything that you can that's not related to the activity that you want, right? So, and this is not unique to game development or artists or whatever, right? If the conditions are met, you're able to get into a flow state. If the activity is given, this is individual, and then you have something called team flow, which is a specific group of people that are engaging towards a collective goal. And this could be in brainstorming, product optimization. It could be towards creating a new feature or problem solving or whatever. But there's something to be said about a group environment that is set for a specific amount of time that allows for everyone to join into the activity and partake and have agency over that as well. And so that's the team flow aspect. An organizational flow is having an organization that is allowing for these different types of flow states to occur naturally. But also, and I say this a lot, and it's actually very paradoxical, I'm not as interested in flow itself. I'm more interested in what the state can do for us and what it happens when you start designing it as a true north, a direction. Because in order for you to have flow, there's some other conditions that need to be met. You can't be in a flow state 24/7. And if someone claims that they are, usually that's either psychosis or a misunderstanding.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So you talked about elements, and let's dive into that. What are the elements of individual flow? And then maybe after that we can talk about the elements of team flow, and then how you think the organization should relate to that.
Sure. Yeah, the elements that you were outlining are what they're called, so-called triggers.
Okay.
So they're the mechanisms that are clicking you into place to drive into a state. Another thing to note is also that a flow state is a thing that happens on a sliding scale.
Okay.
So you can have a microflow, which is not the big time dilution state, but it's a little bit more subtle. And some researchers actually believe that the amount of microflow that you can have in your life are correlative to how happy and fulfilled you are in your life.
Oh, interesting.
And then there's the macro state that just full blown, right? 4 or 5 hours go by and you pretty much coded the thing that you wanted to code over the next week in this one session, or you come up with these amazing designs that you don't know where it came from, and all you hear those people say is, I have no idea where this came from. It felt like it came outside of me and came in me, and now I've created this. I don't even want to take credit for it. And I think one aspect to this is because of the neurobiology, where you're starting to not identify with you having done the activity, but it's kind of you're merging with it, right? The surfers mention this when they say, I become one with the wave, or climbers become one with the rock face, or gamers become one with the game, with the characters that they're playing, or the mechanisms, if there's no character, right? The mechanisms that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so,
Okay.
yeah, to come back to your question, because I realized I haven't actually answered it.
Yeah.
There's triggers, which are things that are driving you into flow, and then there's blockers that are driving you out of flow. And these are usually connected to arousal. So managing arousal and making sure that you are able to drive your experience into the activity.
Okay. Arousal's a loaded word. Can you define?
Yeah. So arousal in the sense of stress contexts. So arousal in terms
Okay.
of boredom and anxiety would probably be the two opposite spectrums, right?
Okay.
And it's related to stress here. And so you have too much stress gives you anxiety, too little stress
Mm-hmm.
gives you boredom.
Mm-hmm.
And before we go on, we probably need to define stress or redefine stress, because a lot of people have
Okay.
a negative relationship to the word.
Yep.
And so we in flow research, we talk about two types of stress, and the stress research does the same. We're talking about eustress, which is positive, and then we're talking about distress, and the distress is the negative stress. It's beyond your current capabilities in a way, right? You're not
Okay.
being able to manage this stress, right? And this is subjective. This is also why if you see soldiers going out, a regular individual would not be able to handle the stress, and sometimes they can't either. But it's individual, right? You're kind of stretching the amount of stress you are able to take in what context.
Okay.
And so for one person, a conversation can be highly stressful, where for another, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's managing your own subjective experience around stress. And we're not talking about physiological stress at this point, even though it has a component to that.
Okay. Now, relate that back to triggers and blockers of flow states.
Yeah, so triggers are driving you into an optimal state of arousal where you're somewhere in between not being bored, not being
Mm-hmm.
anxious. And
Mm-hmm.
if you want to put that in a context of a game or a environment, we can do both. In a game, if the journey of the player is not managed properly and you're overloading with difficulty, or they're being placed in an environment where they're not being able to do anything because it's the other players are too skilled, or the gameplay is too advancing too fast for this player, then they
Mm-hmm.
become overly anxious and they will not be able to get into flow, and they will not have a playful experience either because it becomes too serious, too intense. They get aroused in a negative way.
So they're basically hitting that
Yeah,
negative anxiety level.
exactly. And if your progression in a game, for example, is not matching the player's capabilities, then they become bored and they're not likely to continue playing.
Okay.
And so you want to manage the amount of arousal that goes with this. And I think the future of games will probably have something where the player is getting measured along the way, and then it gets adapted in gameplay. And sometimes they might be progressing and learning the gameplay faster and mastering the game faster, and sometimes they're not. And so if you
Mm-hmm.
have a flexible way to design for that, you will have a more optimal arousal state. And this means they will likely either be in a very playful environment, having fun, or they will go into flow and actually have something that's life changing in the end, which reduces stress, which allows them to forget themselves a little bit. And most people, if they're going into entertainment, they're looking to forget themselves for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So coming back to that idea of individual triggers and blockers. Okay, so we have triggers, we have blockers to an individual flow state. What we're trying to balance with those things, um, or rather, I'd say avoiding blockers and hitting the right triggers, is striking the balance between boredom and anxiety, so that we're in this healthy space of now, what else is there that causes flow to happen?
Well, the optimal challenge and skills balance, right? So you want to have some sort of progression as well. If it's the same experience, then you will have too much adaptability, and then again there will be on that axis of anxiety or boredom, where they're getting too bored because it doesn't really
Right.
happen. Another thing would be distractibility, right? If there is too much interruption into your gameplay, for example, then you're getting drawn out of the experience. So
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be managed as well. And it can be linked to the workplaces too. If you're
Slack's going off all the time, emails, notifications popping up. Someone comes over, taps me on the shoulder.
Yep. Yep. But also other things, right? If you're not taking care of your overall things that you got going for yourself, then that might kind of creep in. Or if you have a very messy desk that has that one paper there that you need to be handing in because you need to fill out something, a report, or something that reminds you of the code that you need to write that you've been avoiding, or you name it, you know what that thing is that's on your desk. Pretty much is what
Yeah,
I'm saying, because it's
yeah, yeah,
individual,
yeah.
right? And so if you're not kind of being careful with your psychic energy is what it's called in the literature, but it's pretty much your ability to pay attention to the thing that you want to be paying attention to. So you need to make sure that for you as an individual, you design an environment that allows you to focus on the thing that you need to be focusing on. And for an artist, that might be very messy because it's so messy that they're not even picking up the things. And for somebody else, it might be a very clean desk.
When I was at Riot, or when I've worked with like directly with clients and things like that, even back in my time in the military, there was always more stuff to do than I had time to do, and there were always, as you said, some big project that really required the kind of focus you're talking about, the sort of merging with the work and getting in there if I was going to do it efficiently. Otherwise, I had to do it in like bits and pieces, and it takes just forever. Like a 3-page PowerPoint deck takes, 2 months or something like that, because it's just, I can only do it in the little bits here and there. Whereas if I could just sit down for a couple hours, and I think that's a common feeling that a lot of people have, especially leaders in game dev, because they're in so many meetings and there's so many different things to do. What does it mean to can I just sit down and like get the thing done,
Hmm.
get the big thing, that task that I need to do? But they feel torn by all those other demands on their attention
Yeah.
that are living in their head,
Yeah.
and that to some extent, if they forgot about, would be bad, right? Because then they would, then they wouldn't do them, and some of them matter. Okay, so I'm kicking this out to you, like, what for that person, for that leader, for me, right? Overwhelmed with all those little things,
Yeah.
and yet here's the big stuff to do.
Yeah.
How do I go about reframing my individual environment?
As a leader, as a founder, you have to be the big picture person. So ideally, you need to understand or have the right people that help you understand the different mechanisms behind what the functions are within the different areas of your business. And then you need to translate that into things that people can take ownership of and have agency over themselves to create the activities and mechanisms. And this can only happen if you have the right guiding principles and values. And you can't copy that. It's just not possible. Because
What do you,
yeah,
what do you mean by that? So you need the right principles and values, but you can't copy them. I assume that means that, look, you have to actually embody these things. They have to be lived out inside of the
yeah.
organization, for them to be true. You can't just write it on the wall, right? It has to be real. What are those things? What are the values and principles that help design an environment for flow?
Well, again, there's some mechanisms that need to be put into place, right? So the environment needs to be able to facilitate individuals to go and shut the door and tell everyone to stay out if they have something
Okay.
that they need to do on themselves.
Okay.
It also needs to foster familiarity. So you have to have an environment where they can interact in one way or another, and this could be within a game or at the water cooler. It doesn't really matter. And then you need to have a place where you can co-create and sit together, right? Where you have different meeting rooms and have to have space to have breaks. And this can be outside of the venue, or it could be in their homes or whatever. But you need to design different places and rituals. And it can be the same place that does the same thing, but you need to figure out what your organization needs in order for their values and principles to come alive, and allow people to have activities that allow them to go off on their own and do their thing and not get interrupted. But at the same time, be able to sit together and facilitate something that comes out of the blue that helps solve a problem. And that's challenging, right? It takes work, it takes effort, but the alternative is not working.
So if you were to go into, well, I'll ask us a couple questions. Again, we're trying to design the organization for flow at the team and individual level and balancing those things.
Yep.
Um, so if a random company, like you've been working with game dev studios,
Yeah.
you show up and you look around, what do you commonly see as the things that are getting in the way of this ideal state?
Poor leadership is definitely one. Or
Okay.
misunderstood leadership is probably the better word to put in it. I also see a lack of understanding what your multitasking is doing to your brain and to your work and to the game that you're working on.
Okay.
Depending on the size of the organization, then there's some regular business activities that are not helpful.
Okay.
This could be meetings where people are forced to be sitting in, but they're not getting any chance to partake in that meeting. And why are they there?
Mm-hmm.
You have this resource of a different perspective of a person that might have a different angle that has a better solution, but you're not drawing them in. And even if
Okay.
if you could do that, then you're not designing it in a way where they feel it's safe to speak. Another thing is because these underlying principles of what the values and the mechanisms of the game, the big ones have this, right? They have this in place. But smaller studios or double A's not necessarily have put as much time into this, and so there needs to be spent a little bit of time to outline what the core is here in order for it to trickle out into everything else. But often it's what are our values? What is our joint goal? What is the identity of this game that we're making? What is the identity of the studio? What is the identity of the team within the bigger organization?
Mm-hmm.
And then leadership, lacking the ability to be ambidextrous in their leadership style. And that means as a leader in your position, whether it's a small team or you're at the top, what you need to be able to do is look at both the macro and the micro and understand both and both needs and then juggle the two.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so what happens there is that often there's numbers and things being barked at the top, and then they're kind of being placed from the top down, and then you need to accommodate to that, and then there might be some emotional intelligence issues where you're not as communicative, and the person actually doing the thing that is making money, creating the game, doesn't have any ownership or agency over the game itself as well, right? And so it's just this down the slope skiing kind of situation, and you're just
Mm-hmm.
putting on skis, and then it just goes downhill, and you just need to kind of get to that objective, right? But you need to spend some time kind of identifying who's part of this team and what's the identity of the team, the organization, and the individuals within that, right? And that's
So there's a. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, and so that's difficult to manage. I understand that it takes time, it takes practice. And so I think the leadership roles are often misunderstood, that you think that you need to kind of just put the to-dos down and make sure that that they keep track of that the to-dos are done. But more often than not, you're kind of missing the resources of the individuals that are working in your team or organization because you're not allowing for co-creation to happen in this way. And they are creating,
What is
right? Because they're putting their blood, sweat, and tears in that game or that product that you're working on. It might be something else, right? You might be working for live ops or whatever, but it's still the same principles.
when you say co-creation? What do you mean by that?
Well, And this is alluding to what I mentioned when I said, well, you need to identify the processes and activities, right? And so, if you're understanding the objectives and performance indicators of the bigger goal that the studio has, right? You need to be able to, in a conversation style, communicate that, and then allow the people that have to achieve those goals build their own time frame and build their own objectives and activities, and how they can create it, because it gives them ownership and agency, and this translates into a feeling of being autonomous, which is one of the preconditions of flow, obviously.
Oh, it's not obvious. It's not obvious. Okay, precondition to flow is autonomy.
One of them is autonomy,
One
yeah.
of them is
At least
autonomy. Yeah.
perceived autonomy, right? You don't need to have autonomy,
Oh, interesting.
but it needs to
So
be.
you're saying we should trick our people? No, I'm just kidding.
If you're that smart and you feel like that's the best way to do it, I mean, it's a wasted resource if you need to go and figure out a way how to trick your people.
Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of creating autonomy in creative environments, because I think it, while some level of constraints are helpful for the creative process, if everybody's just operating off direction, they will eventually internalize that, um, and become people who just do what you tell them, not people who move towards the goal. And those are unfortunately two different things. They rarely line up one to one in a creative environment like game dev.
Yeah.
Okay, so if autonomy is one precondition, what are others?
Clear goals, complete
Okay,
concentration, the challenge skills balance would be another one.
okay,
And then you have to define if it's a team or individual flow as well. And if it's a team flow, which we haven't talked as much about,
yeah,
open, clear communication,
okay,
unambiguous feedback.
okay,
Everyone needs to partake, and there's an improv rule that's called yes and
mm-hmm,
it's a contributing factor. You can still disagree, but you need
mm-hmm,
to conclude your point in a meeting with something additive
okay,
or in an activity, right? And so you could say, oh, this suggestion here, I don't agree with that. That is the best way to do this, but I heard something really interesting that I think we can use in the words that I'm saying, or it's making me realize something that I didn't think about. So I think we could include this in this way. And it's not always
mm-hmm,
possible, but it's something that's driving. And one thing that happens during flow is the vanishing of the ego, the self. You're still self-aware, you're still in your experience, you're still
mm-hmm,
hearing things and perceiving, and you're having thoughts and everything, but you are not aware of your ego as the I in my existence. And so in team flow, you become one with the activity that the group is doing.
mm-hmm,
And so whenever you're faced with something that makes you self-aware, a compliment or a criticism, both make you very self-aware. And so you need to be careful of that.
interesting. Even compliments.
Yeah. Well, if I tell you, hey, look, this was a fantastic idea. I really loved this one thing that you did back then with the game, then that person is going to, oh, this is the standard that the group wants for me, and is thinking about the self experience, but also becoming very aware of it. So if the more you can go into the activity and the actual activity points, rather
Mm-hmm.
than complimenting so you can compliment the activity, but see if you can avoid complimenting the person directly as an individual.
While you're in this state of team flow.
What? Yes, not just, but also if you want to facilitate team flow. So you want to make
Yeah.
sure that you're not making people self-aware in the sense of the my identity in the group.
I've heard a lot of people say compliments are really important.
Mm.
Um, here you're kind of bringing them up as a barrier potentially to that state of team flow. What do you think of that?
Complement features and activities, not people.
Give me an example.
Well, if you're saying, hey, you rock, you made that happen over there, that's a very individualized, ego driven compliment.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say, wow, that feature is super cool, I really like the design of that specific thing, you're referring to the work and not to the person. So you're still giving the compliment.
Mm-hmm.
Or, for example, you're getting a summary of something, right? A team report or some numbers or whatever. You could be saying, wow, you did a really good job at this. Or you could say, oh, this is really thoroughly done. The numbers are very accurate. Or this artwork is really helping the game or something like that, right? And it's tricky because it's just in our nature to compliment the person directly. But if you're giving the compliment to the person based on the activity, it's not making them self-aware in that way. But you're highlighting the thing that's actually relevant to. You're highlighting the thing that you love about what that person has done.
And you described it as essentially both through compliment and criticism, because I assume criticism follows the same rules, which
Yeah.
is we can talk about the work. We don't talk about the person. We don't say, hey, you didn't do a very good job on this. We say, I see room for improvement in this area of the work that you did.
Yeah.
That idea is the reduction of the ego in the room, because ego is a barrier. Like your ego is a blocker to flow.
Yeah, and it's often also a stressor, right? Because if you're complimenting something that went right, that person is going to strive to maintain that, because acceptance is something that's uniquely needed for individuals working in organizations and groups and whatever. You want to be approved with your peers and the people that you're working with. And so having personal compliments directly, right? And it's just an easy way for us to change our style of communication and not get any misunderstandings too.
That's so interesting because I've managed people, and I'm pretty sure I've complimented them, probably as individuals. I mean, I know I've complimented people as individuals before. That lens of, hey, you're complimenting them, it's so that they feel better and that they're encouraged in their work. But there is a potential downside of that, which is they internalize that as an expectation. The compliment becomes the new bar that they have to reach. And that actually drags too much of them to the forefront and prevents them from being in the free and autonomous state, to the state of optimal consciousness, where they can do their best work because they're aware of the expectation. And so they have to almost put that behind them and get over it, even if it's a compliment or obviously a direct criticism, but both prevent the person from going back to the place where they can do their best work.
Yeah, think of it in this way too. Your attention. If you're paying attention to the activity that you're doing, right? You're directing your psychic energy towards something that you're creating, whatever. But once you get that compliment, the flashlight is pointing back at yourself and not the activity anymore. And automatically that will create some residue of awareness of yourself within the activity, and so your resources are just being drained slightly. It might be a small thing, but if someone is an introvert and they're very sensitive to being self-aware,
Okay.
for example, it's a hypothetical situation, right?
Yeah. I'm an introvert. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, if you don't want to have that flashlight be pointed at you, then if the person points it at you, their flashlight, and you're pointing your flashlight towards yourself as well, right? It's too much attention, and that can get really overwhelming. And so it's a little bit of a game of attention there, right? So you want to drive your attention as much as you can towards the thing that you want to be focusing on.
So let me see. I want to go back because you listed them out fairly quickly. I want to go back and talk about those preconditions for flow. Because I don't even remember all of them right now, but you've got them off the top of your head. I remember there was we talked about autonomy. You talked about clarity of goal,
Yeah.
like a clear purpose.
Well, it's
And then you,
yeah. Let's double click on clarity of goal, right?
yeah,
This is in essence to reduce the amount of friction, but also the amount of resources you need to do to get started on something as well. We only have so much attention to give from, and we're being bombarded. We're at a war of attention in a way, right, with our devices and everything. And so having a clear goal and understanding what you need for the activity that's at hand and have done the preparation beforehand just allows you to dive into it and not use all the resources to figure out what the hell is up and down.
got it. Okay. There's a theme actually in a lot of these then around the idea of attention, right? Like a lot of these preconditions are attention related. And this leads me back to a question I was thinking about a long time ago. You were talking about setting up an organization. Part of me looks at myself as an individual and goes, the things I've had to put in place to block out distraction. Like I use a software that prevents me from, I don't know, accessing YouTube during working hours, right? And why? Because it's a distraction and it's really easy and I can just go over, or I've turned my phone into basically a dumb phone. It hardly has anything on it because that was the simplest way for me to get around the problem of just how compelling might be an appropriate word the phone can be to constantly like draw my attention and draw my attention. It makes a beep or it makes a noise. It's like I turn pretty much the notifications or don't make noise, and my wife is special. My wife makes a beep. Nobody else can beat me through my phone without calling.
Same.
And there's a frame in there that is like, I don't want this thing to be distracting me. And in some sense, I have not been able to, over the years of trying, just use my willpower to avoid that. So I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to turn it into a dumb phone. I'm going to put the blockers up, and it's been very helpful for me. So I'm curious, like again, that idea of attention is very resonant in this. Where attention, I'd say that broadly, you could say attention is a precondition to flow. You have to be able to put your attention on that thing,
Yeah.
almost as wholly as you can. So talking about that at an individual level, I just listed some things I've done: dumb phone, blockers on YouTube during working hours or whatever. What are things you think about or advise people to do if they're like, I'm trying to get into a flow state more in my work or in my life, but it's so hard because, I wish I wasn't as distractible as I was.
Yeah.
I think that's a very common feeling nowadays.
You need to identify what your key activities are and processes. What are the things that are valuable to you as an individual, as a team, as an organization, and why they're valuable. And then use friction to protect that. You've done it yourself, right? You've created friction to get onto YouTube. You can still do it if you want it.
Yeah. Yep.
You can still get messages if you want to. You can still open your phone and go into it, right? And then you need to ask yourself, well, how much friction do I need? Do I need to have the phone in a locker where I need to put a Rubik's Cube game and have to play something in order for me to unlock it again? Or how much friction do you need to get it to your devices? Or how much friction do you need to create for people not to interrupt you? But also, how can you reduce friction to do the things that you want to do?
There's a lot of time spent understanding the way you describe it as identity or purpose, like the clarity of the goal. I'm 100% behind that. And again, I haven't thought of it from the flow angle,
Sure.
although um, I appreciate that lens as well. Is like what you're actually doing in this is capturing attention in the right places and not getting distracted by those endless distractions that are out there. I think I've said this before on the podcast, but I had a non-commissioned officer when I was in the Army who told me, "Sir, go home. There's always more work," because I just kept staying late trying to get it all done.
Yeah.
And she was just going like, "Sir, stop it. There's always going to be something else you have to do. You have to stop at some point." And it started reframing the question for me of not how do I get all the work done, but what's the right work to do. And a lot of this focus on attention, focus on identity, focus on clarity of goal is around like, hey, if you know what the identity of the game is, if you know the identity of the team as it relates to the game and the studio, now it allows me to focus my efforts more narrowly to add the maximum value that I can add instead of having to be distracted, as you described it, as almost I've got to figure out the why. I've got to figure out every time I start the task, I have to go like, well, wait a minute, why are we doing this? And I have to ask that question. And by the way, I'll say that's a good question to ask if you don't know the answer, right? I just think a mistake that some people make is they just assume an answer and go, and then they build the wrong thing. So it's a good question to ask, but it also points to this idea if everybody's constantly asking that question, it means you have not set up the environment for that flow because everybody's always hitting a roadblock and going, wait a minute, what's this for?
I mean, there's something to be said about smaller teams. Often, when studios start out smaller and become bigger, they get less and less access to flow because they're kind of in this bureaucracy loop where there's too many things coming in, tugging at their creativity and playfulness and being able to focus and shut down in a way, right? That's one aspect. But another cool aspect is that you were playing together. And play, the study of play, seems to be indicative of a mode of operating that both kids and adults can come into that allows us to be in a hypothetical, a little bit artificial environment for us to operate in groups and teams, but it also allows for us to have lightness and less self-awareness, right? And that seems to be indicative of being a potential precursor to be able to get into flow as well, right? Where you have you have skin in the game, but not too much, so you'd be able to kind of play with it, right? And I think you learn a lot by playing games. And so if that was something that you did before intense work, yeah, the flow fosters flow. So if you have flow in other areas of your life, you will start to pick it up in different aspects of your life as well. And so that's one indicator that I see, and it's kind of a thing that I've been hearing in my head a lot. It's the sentence of "Let my people play." It's a little sentence that sums up for me the able to improvise and be light, and for people to have the agency over their own player in a way within the game of creating games.
There's something that just popped for me around this idea of I don't know if you heard the idea. One of the worst ways to achieve happiness is to pursue it directly.
Yep.
And I feel like as we're talking about flow, that's true as well. If you're just like I need to get into flow, and you're just constantly like I gotta get into flow and like force myself into flow, and like, it's not. You actually, happiness comes as an after effect of something else that's going on in your life.
Yeah, I think there's a direct correlation between flow and happiness, and I remember that we talked. I'm not sure. I think it was not on this podcast episode. It was in a different conversation that I mentioned. It's not about the state. It's really not. Don't go chasing flow. Design for it. Start to understand it. Start to figure out what it feels like. But there's another condition there, right? If you're thinking, am I in flow right now? You're not. Because if you remember, the action and your awareness needs to merge. And so if you're thinking, oh my God, is it happening? Then it's not happening. And you will not realize you're in flow until after the fact.
Is there anything else when you're thinking about making organizations for flow, designing for flow? There's leaders out there at many levels, whether it's a team level in a large organization or leading large or small organizations or whatever. Any last bit of advice you have for them as they think about trying to get the most out of their people in a way that's beneficial to those people on the game and the players?
Yeah, draw a map of war in a way. Get the combat landscape. Is if you've read The Art of War, it's often misunderstood. It's more about understanding the different conflict points, the conflict of the system. And so start by understanding what your unique makeup is, right? What is your player like? If you have IP, what is that unique IP? What is the team that I'm working with? What has not worked? How do we look when we're at our worst? How do we look when we're at our best? What are the components of that? What are the activities that we need to get there? And how do we design for this? I guess is what it is in a nutshell. And then there's different activities to get there. But it's a process. And like everything that we've talked about, flow is experiential and active. And so you need something that's experiential and active. So it trickles into something that you have quickly access to and not just need to, use the very expensive resource of using your mind to have complex problem solving challenges.
Yeah.
Freeing up your resources in a way, right?
Yeah. To again enable the focus.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. How do people find out more about you? What do you anything you want to call out?
Sure.
Before we close?
I mean, if anything resonated, come ask me, chat to me on LinkedIn. You can also go the official way and go onto our webpage, FlowMade.org. Come listen to the podcast, GameWell. It's about thriving in games and creating better games in a different aspect where I'm bringing people from the outside in as well, but also people from the industry.
Fantastic. All right. Check them out. Kevin, thank you so much for talking to us about flow in organizations, and hope to have you on again sometime.
For sure. I'd love to.
All right, just to quickly summarize that episode. First thing, what are individual and team flow states? An individual flow state is an active state where your personal awareness merges with the activity you are engaging with. A team flow state is where a group of people are engaging towards a collective goal with everyone being able to participate in the activity while maintaining their agency. Second thing, your goal should be to build an organization or team where flow is likely to occur because of the benefits people get from being in flow. Third, getting into flow involves getting into the right spot between boredom and anxiety. Having enough stress, eustress, or positive stress, but not too much distress, negative stress, is important. The amount of stress that is right is dependent on the individual and the circumstances. The challenge must be at the right level compared to the skills that the person has. Fourth thing, distractions prevent people from reaching a flow state. Fifth, there's a bunch of other stuff that can get in the way of flow. 1, leadership that can't think up and down the organization and so don't provide good direction that's helpful to the team. 2, multitasking. 3, wasted time. 4, lack of a safe space to discuss and talk. 5th, lack of clear goals. And 6th, the lack of ownership for an individual over the timeline and goals that they're working on. 6th, criticism and even compliments can be barriers to reaching and maintaining flow if they pull the person to start being too self-aware. Complimenting or critiquing the work, not the person, will help you avoid this. 7th, use friction to your advantage. Build friction around the things that distract you or take you away from the key activities you need to do. You can do this for your org as well. Make it hard to do the things that get in the way of being able to give attention to what matters to you. That'll help you get to flow. 8th, the more clear you can make the purpose, the why, the reason behind what you're doing for everyone, the less time needs to be spent solving those problems whenever work is attempted. Scaling organizations, as they grow, lose this, because with bureaucracy comes a disconnect from the shared purpose that everyone started with. Ninth, as an individual or organization, don't chase flow. Design for it, and then let it happen organically. And if it's not, see if you can address that in the design of the organization and systems, not through somehow trying to force flow to happen. All right, that's the end of the episode. Thank you so much. Did you enjoy this episode? If you did and are looking for more conversations like this one, join the Building Better Games Discord community. It's for leaders and producers in game dev who are frustrated with solving the wrong problems and who want to share experiences and learn how to lead and build better games. Check out the show notes to join. I'll see you there.